Commander James Reeves stood in the observation deck of Nexus Station, staring at the stars beyond the thick reinforced glass. His reflection looked back at him, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped forward, hair more gray than it had been 3 months ago. He was only 35, but he felt ancient. Another failure, he whispered to himself. The meeting had ended 20 minutes ago. The Zenthari delegation had walked out after the Korvax representatives refused to discuss territorial boundaries. It was the same pattern over and over again. Both sides came to the table, both sides made impossible demands, both sides left angry, and people kept dying in a war that made less sense with each passing day. James pulled out his datapad and scrolled through the messages. 6 diplomats before him had tried to broker peace between the Zenthari Empire and the Korvax Federation. All 6 had resigned. Some cited political reasons. Others were honest. They simply couldn't take the stress anymore. The weight of millions of lives depending on words that never seemed to be enough. He had promised himself he would be different. He would find a way. But after 3 months of 16-hour days, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating meals from ration packs, and watching both sides refuse to budge even a single inch, James was starting to understand why the others had given up. His communicator buzzed. Another message from Earth Command, asking for a progress report. James sighed and decided to take a walk instead. He needed to clear his head before he could write yet another report explaining that nothing had changed. The corridors of Nexus Station were always busy. It was neutral territory built specifically for diplomatic purposes. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species worked here, lived here, argued here. James walked past a group of Delphinian traders, their tall blue forms gesturing wildly as they discussed some business deal. He passed a meditation chamber where several wisdom keepers sat in silent contemplation. He nodded to a human security officer who recognized him and offered a sympathetic smile. Everyone on the station knew about the peace talks. Everyone knew they were failing. James found a quiet corner in one of the lower corridors and sat down on a bench. He pulled out his datapad again, trying to review the proposals for tomorrow's session. But the words blurred together. His mind was too tired to focus. "Excuse me?" "Sir?" The voice was small and soft. James looked up to see a Zenthari child standing in front of him. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old in human terms. Her scales were a beautiful mix of blue and silver, catching the light in patterns that shifted as she moved. Large golden eyes studied him with open curiosity. James sat up straighter, surprised. The Zenthari were known for being formal and reserved, especially with outsiders. Their children rarely approached strangers, particularly humans. "Hello," James said gently, managing a tired smile. "Are you lost? Do you need help finding someone?" The girl tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "You look as tired as my sister, sir." James blinked. Of all the things he had expected her to say, that wasn't one of them. "Your sister?" "Yes, sir. She works in the medical wing. She takes care of sick people and hurt people. She comes home very late, and sometimes she doesn't come home at all. She looks like you, tired in the eyes." There was something painfully honest in the way the child spoke. No pretense, no political calculation, just a simple observation from someone too young to understand the complex web of diplomacy and war. "I'm sorry your sister has to work so hard," James said softly. "What's your name?" "Liz," the girl replied. "What's your name, sir?" "James. Commander James Reeves." He paused, then asked, "Does your sister work with the wounded soldiers?" Liz nodded solemnly. "Lots of soldiers come. From both sides," she says. "She tells me she wishes they would stop fighting because everyone is so tired. The soldiers are tired. The doctors are tired. Everyone is tired." She looked at James with those impossibly large golden eyes. "Are you tired because of the fighting too, sir?" Before James could answer, A Zenthari adult appeared, a tall female with darker scales and an official-looking uniform. Her face showed alarm when she saw Liz talking to a human. "Liz, what have I told you about wandering away?" The Guardian's voice was sharp, but James could hear the worry underneath. She bowed slightly to James, her manner formal and cold. "My apologies, Commander. The child doesn't understand proper boundaries." "No apology necessary," James said quickly. She was very polite. The Guardian took Liz's hand firmly. "Come, child. Your sister will worry if we're late." As they walked away, Liz looked back over her shoulder and waved at James. He waved back, watching them disappear around the corner. James sat there for a long moment, Liz's words echoing in his mind. "Everyone is so tired." It was such a simple observation, a child's perspective, uncomplicated by politics or pride. But there was truth in it, a truth that James had been too exhausted to see clearly until now. He pulled out his datapad with renewed energy and began typing notes. Not another formal proposal full of diplomatic language and carefully balanced concessions. Something different. Something that acknowledged the one thing both sides shared, the one thing no one wanted to admit. They were all tired. The Zenthari were tired. The Korvax were tired. The soldiers were tired. The medical staff was tired. The diplomats were tired. And maybe, just maybe, that shared exhaustion could be the foundation for something new. James worked through the night, his mind racing with possibilities. By morning, he had the outline of a completely different approach. It was unconventional, possibly even radical. But for the first time in 3 months, he felt something he hadn't felt since arriving at Nexus Station. Hope. James couldn't sleep that night. His mind kept returning to little Liz and her simple words about her tired sister. At 2 in the morning station time, he gave up trying to rest and decided to take another walk through Nexus Station's corridors. His feet carried him almost without conscious thought through the maze of passages and levels. He found himself in a section of the station he hadn't visited before, the medical district. Signs in multiple languages pointed toward various facilities: emergency treatment, long-term care, surgical units, rehabilitation centers. James followed the signs until he reached a large set of doors marked Military Medical Wing, authorized personnel only. Through the reinforced glass windows, he could see movement inside. Lots of movement. The scene beyond those doors was organized chaos. Medical personnel in different colored uniforms rushed between beds. Floating medical drones carried supplies and equipment. Holographic displays showed vital signs and treatment protocols. And everywhere, in every bed, on every medical table, were wounded soldiers. What struck James most was that he could see both Zenthari and Korvax patients being treated side by side. A Zenthari doctor worked on a Korvax soldier, while a Korvax nurse adjusted the IV line for a Zenthari patient. Enemy combatants lying meters apart, receiving care from each other's people. As James watched through the window, he spotted a familiar figure. A young Zenthari female with blue and silver scales moved efficiently between patients, checking monitors, adjusting medications, speaking quietly to those who were awake. Even from this distance, James could see the exhaustion in every movement she made. That had to be Kessa, Liz's sister. James pressed the call button beside the door. After a moment, a tired-looking human nurse appeared on the other side of the glass. She looked at James's diplomatic credentials on his uniform and reluctantly opened the door a crack. "Commander Reeves?" She recognized him from station briefings. "This area is restricted. Is there an emergency?" "No emergency," James said quietly. I'd like to help, if you need it. Extra hands." "I can follow instructions." The nurse looked at him suspiciously. "You're the peace negotiator. Why would you want to work in the medical wing?" Because I met a little girl who told me her sister was tired, and I think maybe I've been approaching peace talks from the wrong angle. James met her eyes steadily. Please, I'm not here as a diplomat. I'm here as someone who can carry supplies, change bedding, or do whatever simple tasks you need done. You all look overwhelmed. The nurse studied him for a long moment, then her shoulders sagged slightly. We are overwhelmed. We've been running on emergency staffing for 2 months now. She glanced back at the chaos behind her, then made a decision. Come in. But you follow orders exactly, understand? No diplomatic authority in here. In this wing, the doctors are in charge. Understood. James agreed immediately. The nurse, who introduced herself as Sarah Chen from the Earth Medical Corps, led him inside and provided him with sanitized scrubs and basic safety equipment. She explained the color coding system for supplies, the emergency protocols, and the strict rules about patient confidentiality. One more thing, Sarah said seriously. What you see in here stays in here. We're treating wounded from both sides, which technically violates about 17 different military regulations. But people are dying, Commander. We take an oath to heal, not to pick sides. James nodded solemnly. I understand, and I won't report anything I see here. For the next 4 hours, James worked alongside the medical staff. He carried supply containers, disposed of medical waste properly, helped transport patients on floating gurneys, and brought water to those who could drink. It was simple work, but it freed up the trained medical personnel to focus on actual treatment. As he worked, James observed everything. He saw a Xanthari surgeon teaching a Korvax medical student a new technique for treating plasma burns. He watched a Korvax anesthesiologist carefully monitoring a Xanthari soldier during a procedure. Treating the enemy combatant with the same care he would show his own people. He heard doctors and nurses from both species discussing cases, sharing knowledge, working together to save lives. During a brief quiet moment, James found himself near Kessa as she checked on a young Korvax soldier who was sleeping restlessly. She adjusted his pain medication with practiced efficiency, then pulled a thin blanket higher over his chest. The gesture was tender, almost maternal. You're Lys's sister, James said quietly. Kessa looked up, startled. Recognition flickered in her golden eyes. You're the human diplomat, the one Lys spoke to yesterday? Her voice was cautious. What are you doing here? Learning, James replied honestly. Your sister told me you were tired. She said everyone was tired. I wanted to understand what she meant. Kessa's expression softened slightly. Lys talks too much sometimes, but she sees things clearly. Children often do. She gestured around the medical wing. This is what tired looks like, Commander. Doctors who haven't slept in 30 hours. Nurses who skip meals because there's always another patient who needs care. Medical supplies running low because the supply ships can't agree on neutral delivery terms. How long have you been treating soldiers from both sides? James asked. Kessa hesitated, then decided to answer. Since the beginning. We all decided, all the medical staff here on Nexus Station, that we wouldn't let people die because of politics. We're not warriors. We're healers. So we heal everyone who needs it. Even though it could get you in trouble? Even though, Kessa confirmed. What are they going to do? Fire us? There aren't enough medical personnel in this sector as it is. She looked at James directly. Besides, when you're holding someone's hand as they die, and they're crying for their mother or their children or their home, you stop caring which uniform they wear. Pain is pain. Loss is loss. Death is death. James felt something shift in his understanding. Have you ever told the negotiating teams about what you do here? About the cooperation happening in this medical wing? Kessa laughed bitterly. No one asks us. Diplomats talk about territorial boundaries and resource rights. Military commanders talk about strategic advantages. No one asks the medical staff what we see. We're just here to patch up the pieces after the important people make their important decisions." "What if someone did ask?" James said slowly, an idea forming. "What if the negotiating teams heard directly from people like you? People who see the real cost of this war every single day?" Kessa looked skeptical. "Commander, I appreciate whatever you're thinking, but I'm a doctor, not a speaker. I wouldn't know what to say to those people." "You'd tell them the truth," James said simply. "The same truth you just told me." Before Kessa could respond, an alarm sounded. Another transport had arrived with wounded soldiers. The medical staff immediately mobilized, and the brief conversation ended as duty called them back to work. James stayed for another 2 hours, helping where he could. By the time Sarah Chen told him he should get some rest, the station's morning cycle was beginning. As James walked back toward his quarters, his mind was racing. He had seen something remarkable in that medical wing. People from enemy civilizations working together perfectly because they shared a common purpose that transcended politics. They had achieved what the diplomats couldn't, genuine cooperation, and little Liz had led him right to it. James pulled out his datapad and began making notes. His new approach was becoming clearer. The negotiating teams needed to see what he had seen. They needed to understand what their war looked like from the perspective of those who healed its wounds. He sent a message to both delegation heads requesting an emergency meeting. Then he sent another message, this one to Kessa, asking if she would be willing to speak to the negotiators, not as a representative of the Zenthari, but simply as someone who saw the truth every day. As he finally lay down to rest, James felt energized despite his physical exhaustion. For the first time since arriving at Nexus Station, he felt like he was on the right path. Sometimes the answers weren't found in conference rooms. Sometimes they were found in the places where people worked together simply because it was the right thing to do. The emergency meeting James had requested took place at noon in Conference Room 7. The atmosphere was tense from the moment everyone entered. The Zenthari delegation sat on one side of the long table, their scales reflecting the cold blue lighting. The Korvax representatives sat opposite them, their fur-covered forms rigid with barely concealed hostility. Admiral Torvin of the Zenthari Empire spoke first, his voice sharp. "Commander Reeves, we agreed to this meeting because you claimed it was urgent. I hope you're not wasting our time with another useless compromise proposal." General Kairos of the Korvax Federation added, her tone equally harsh. "We've been here for 3 months. Nothing has changed. Perhaps it's time to admit these talks have failed." James stood at the head of the table, his hands clasped behind his back. He had prepared for this moment, but he knew his proposal would shock them. "You're right, General. Nothing has changed, and that's precisely the problem. We keep having the same conversations in the same rooms with the same people saying the same things." "Then what do you suggest?" Admiral Torvin asked impatiently. James took a deep breath. "I propose that before we hold any more formal negotiations, every person in this room, every diplomat, every military advisor, every strategic consultant, spends 1 full day working in the medical wing alongside the staff, treating wounded soldiers." The room erupted immediately. "Absolutely not!" Admiral Torvin stood up, his scales darkening with anger. "This is beneath the dignity of imperial representatives." General Kairos was equally outraged. "This is a waste of precious time. We're here to negotiate terms, not to play nurse." James remained calm, his voice steady. "I spent last night in that medical wing. I saw something remarkable there. Something that every person in this room needs to see." "And what is that?" Ambassador Threll, the senior Zenthari diplomat, asked coldly. "Your people and their people," James gestured between the two sides, "working together, perfectly. Zenthari doctors teaching Korvax students, Korvax nurses caring for Zenthari soldiers. No arguments about territory or resources. No demands or counter-demands, just people trying to save lives." "That's their job," General Kairos said dismissively. Medical personnel are neutral. That means nothing politically. James walked to the wall screen and activated it. A document appeared, one he had carefully prepared that morning. This is a detailed report of the medical cooperation happening on this station. It includes names, dates, procedures, and specific instances of so-called enemies working together while their governments tell them they should hate each other. The room went quiet as both sides read the information on the screen. "This is confidential medical information," Ambassador Threll said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "How did you obtain this?" "I was there," James said simply. "I worked alongside them. I carried supplies. I helped transport patients. And I watched your people and their people achieve what we cannot. Actual cooperation based on shared purpose." Admiral Torvin's expression was unreadable. "What is your point, Commander?" "My point is that if this peace talk fails again, I will ensure that every major news network in known space receives this report. Everyone will know that while your soldiers were dying, while your diplomats were arguing about boundaries and pride, your medical teams had already made peace. They'll see that the real heroes of this war are the healers who ignored orders and treated everyone who needed help." The threat hung in the air. Both sides looked uncomfortable. "You're blackmailing us?" General Kiros asked, her fur bristling. "I'm giving you an opportunity," James corrected. "One day. Just one day working in that medical wing. If after that day, you still want to walk away from these talks, I'll include that fact in my report too. But I believe that if you see what I saw, if you do what those medical teams do every single day, you'll understand this war differently." There was a long silence. The two delegations looked at each other across the table, both clearly unhappy but uncertain how to proceed. Finally, Ambassador Threll spoke. "One day?" "One full day," James confirmed. "You'll work under the direction of the medical staff. You'll help however they need you to help, and you'll do it alongside members of the opposing delegation." "This is highly irregular," Admiral Torvin said, but James could hear the hesitation in his voice now. "Everything about this war is irregular, Admiral," James said quietly. "Irregular and senseless. What I'm proposing is a chance to see it through different eyes, not as military strategists or political representatives, but as ordinary people faced with suffering and loss." More silence. Then General Kiros sighed heavily. "If we agree to this unusual request, you'll delay your report." "I'll delay it indefinitely if the talks resume in good faith," James promised. The two delegations requested a private consultation break. James left the conference room and waited in the corridor outside. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. When they finally called him back in, both sides looked resigned. "We agree," Ambassador Threll announced. "Tomorrow, we will spend one day in the medical wing as you've requested. But Commander Reeves, if this is simply a delay tactic or a publicity stunt—" "It's neither," James interrupted gently. "It's a chance to remember why we're supposed to be making peace in the first place." The meeting adjourned. As people filed out, James caught the eye of his own assistant, Maria, who had been taking notes throughout. She approached him with concern written on her face. "Sir, that was incredibly risky. If this backfalls, your career—" "I know," James said, "but I met a little girl who told me her sister was tired. And I realized we've all been too tired to see what's right in front of us. Sometimes you have to take risks to break through walls that logic and reason can't penetrate." That evening, James sent a message to Kessa in the medical wing, warning her that the next day would be unusual. He also sent a message to Sarah Chen and the other medical staff leaders, explaining what he had arranged and asking for their cooperation. Then he sent one more message, to Lys's guardian, requesting permission to visit the child. He wanted to thank her properly for the simple observation that had changed everything. As James prepared for bed that night, he felt nervous but hopeful. Tomorrow would be a test, not of military strength or diplomatic skill, but of something more fundamental: the ability to recognize shared humanity across the barriers of species and conflict. He thought of the wounded soldiers lying in those medical beds, calling out for their families. He thought of Kessa and the other medical staff who worked themselves to exhaustion trying to save everyone. And he thought of little Liz, who had seen something that all the trained diplomats and experienced military officers had missed. Everyone was tired. Tomorrow, James would make sure the people who made decisions about war understood exactly what that tiredness meant. He closed his eyes, knowing that whatever happened next, at least he was trying something different. Sometimes the most radical action wasn't violence or grand gestures. It was simply making people see each other as people rather than as enemies. And sometimes it took a child's innocent observation to show you the way forward. The next morning arrived too quickly for everyone involved. At 6 a.m. station time, the diplomatic and military representatives from both sides gathered outside the medical wing. They wore sanitized scrubs instead of their usual formal uniforms or military dress. Without their symbols of rank and authority, they looked surprisingly ordinary. Sarah Chen met them at the entrance, her expression professional but weary. "Welcome to the medical wing. For the next 12 hours, you work under our direction. You follow our rules. Rank and politics don't exist here. Only patients who need care. Is that understood?" There were reluctant nods from both delegations. Sarah divided them into small mixed groups: Zenthari paired with Korvax, diplomats working alongside military officers. James watched as Admiral Torvin was assigned to work with General Kairos. The two exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. The day began with simple tasks: changing bedding, delivering meals to patients who could eat, cleaning equipment, restocking supply cabinets. The high-ranking officials who normally gave orders now took them from nurses and medical assistants. As the hours passed, the tasks became more difficult emotionally. Ambassador Threll helped transport a badly wounded Korvax soldier from surgery to recovery. The soldier, barely conscious, grabbed the ambassador's hand and whispered, "Tell my daughter I tried to be brave." Ambassador Threll stood frozen for a moment, staring at the soldier's face. Then he squeezed the hand gently and said, "You are brave. Rest now." General Kairos was assigned to sit with a dying Zenthari soldier who had no family nearby. The young soldier's breathing was labored, his scales turning pale. He kept asking for his mother. General Kairos, who had commanded troops in dozens of operations, found herself holding this enemy soldier's hand and quietly humming a Korvax lullaby her own mother had sung to her as a child. When the soldier finally passed away peacefully, General Kairos remained seated, tears running down her furred face. Admiral Torvin was helping in the emergency intake area when a transport arrived with fresh casualties from a recent skirmish. As he helped medical staff unload the wounded, he recognized one of them, a young Zenthari officer who had served under his command 2 years ago. The officer's injuries were severe. "Commander Vel," Admiral Torvin whispered, gripping the young officer's hand as doctors worked frantically. "Stay with us." But despite everyone's efforts, Commander Vel didn't survive. Admiral Torvin had sent thousands of soldiers into danger during his career, but he had never watched one die right in front of him, never felt the exact moment when life left a body he was touching. By late afternoon, everyone was exhausted, physically and emotionally. They had seen things that diplomatic briefings and military reports could never convey. The reality of war wasn't statistics or strategic maps. It was blood and pain and fear and loss. James had arranged for the evening session to be different. He had asked Kessa if she would be willing to speak to the gathered delegations about her experience. She had been reluctant, but after seeing how the day had affected the visitors, she agreed. The conference room felt different that evening. The representatives sat quietly, many still wearing their medical scrubs, too tired to change. Their faces showed something James had never seen before: openness, vulnerability. The walls they had built around themselves had cracked. Kessa entered the room with Liz beside her. The little girl held her sister's hand tightly, offering support. James had suggested that Liz be present, believing her innocent perspective might help. Kessa stood at the front of the room, clearly uncomfortable with so many important eyes on her. She took a deep breath and began speaking. "My name is Kessa. I'm a medical officer assigned to Nexus Station. I've worked in the military medical wing for 18 months. In that time, I've treated over 3,000 patients from both sides of this war." Her voice was quiet but steady. The room was completely silent. "When a soldier comes to me wounded, I don't see Zenthari or Korvax. I don't see Empire or Federation. I see someone in pain who needs help. I see someone who is afraid. I see someone who has people at home who love them and want them to come back safely." Kessa paused, gathering her thoughts. "You all spent today in the medical wing. You saw what we see every day. But what you didn't see is what happens afterward. The nightmares we all have. The names we remember. The faces we can't forget. Especially the ones we couldn't save." Her voice wavered slightly. "My colleagues and I made a choice when this war started. We decided that every life has value. Enemy or ally, it doesn't matter when someone is dying. So we've been treating everyone, working together, sharing knowledge and resources. We've broken rules to do it. We've risked our careers to do it. Because we took oaths to heal, not to let politics decide who deserves to live." Ambassador Threll spoke up, his voice rough. "How do you bear it? The weight of so many lives?" Kessa looked at him directly. "We bear it because we have to. Because if we don't do the work, people die. But I'll be honest with you, we're all reaching our limits. The medical staff is exhausted. We're running out of supplies. We're running out of hope. And we're angry." "Angry?" General Kairos asked softly. "Yes, angry," Kessa confirmed, her voice stronger now. "Angry that we save lives while you debate boundaries. Angry that we work ourselves to collapse while you argue about pride and honor. Angry that soldiers keep dying for reasons none of them can even explain clearly anymore." She looked around the room at each face. "Today, you held the hands of dying people. You heard them cry for their families. You saw that when everything else is stripped away, we're all just people who want to go home safely to the ones we love. So, I have a question for all of you." Kessa's golden eyes were bright with emotion. "When will you be tired enough to stop? How many more people need to die before you decide that peace is more important than whatever you're fighting about?" The room remained silent. Several representatives were crying openly now, something unthinkable before today. Then Liz, who had been quiet beside her sister, spoke up in her small, clear voice. "Everyone here looks tired like my sister. Why don't you all just rest and be friends instead?" The childish simplicity of it hit harder than any diplomatic argument could have. These powerful people, who controlled fleets and armies, who made decisions affecting billions of lives, had been reduced to exhaustion by a war no one could justify anymore. Admiral Torvin stood up slowly. He walked to where General Kairos sat. The room watched in stunned silence as he extended his hand to her, the human gesture of greeting and peace that James had taught to many species during his diplomatic career. "I'm tired, General," Admiral Torvin said, his voice breaking. "I'm so very tired. I think we all are." General Kairos stared at his hand for a long moment. Then she stood and took it, gripping firmly. "I'm tired too, Admiral," she said. "Too tired to keep doing this." One by one, other representatives stood. Zenthari and Korvax began shaking hands, embracing, speaking quietly to each other, not as enemies, but as people who had shared something profound. James stood at the back of the room, watching the barriers finally break down. Beside him, Kessa held Liz close, both of them witnessing the beginning of something new. Sometimes peace didn't come from clever negotiations or strategic compromises. Sometimes it came from simple exhaustion and the recognition that everyone hurt the same way, grieved the same way, and wanted the same things: safety, home, and an end to suffering. Little Liz had been right all along. Everyone was just too tired to keep fighting. The formal treaty negotiations began 3 days after Kessa's speech, but everything was different now. The delegations no longer sat on opposite sides of the table glaring at each other. Instead, they sat mixed together, Zenthari beside Korvax, former enemies working side by side to craft an agreement. The document they created became known throughout the galaxy as the Accords of Exhaustion. It was unlike any peace treaty that had come before it. The opening statement, written jointly by Admiral Torvin and General Kairos, was simple and honest. We, the representatives of the Zenthari Empire and the Korvax Federation, acknowledge that we are tired. Tired of loss, tired of grief, tired of sending our young people to die for territorial disputes that matter far less than the lives they cost. Therefore, we choose peace, not because we have resolved all our differences, but because we lack the will and the heart to continue destroying each other. The treaty included immediate ceasefire orders across all contested territories. But it went beyond simple military agreements. It established joint medical facilities at key locations, staffed by personnel from both sides. It created exchange programs where military families from both civilizations could visit each other's worlds, building understanding and friendship. It set up regular diplomatic meetings focused not on arguing about resources or boundaries, but on shared recovery and healing. Most importantly, the treaty included a provision that before any future disagreement could escalate to military action, the leaders involved would spend 3 days working in medical facilities treating the wounded, so they would never forget the true cost of their decisions. The news spread across known space rapidly. Humans, who had been trying to broker peace between the two powers for over a year, were astonished. The galactic media called it a miracle. Political analysts debated how such a sudden shift had been possible. But those who had been in that conference room knew the truth. It wasn't complicated diplomatic maneuvering or strategic brilliance that had ended the war. It was exhaustion, honesty, and the simple observation of a child who saw what adults had been too proud to acknowledge. James Reeves became famous overnight. Every major news network wanted to interview him. Universities offered him prestigious teaching positions. His own government prepared numerous awards and honors. But James declined most of the attention, redirecting it instead to Kessa and the medical staff who had actually done the difficult work. "I didn't end the war," James told reporters at a press conference. "The medical personnel who treated everyone with equal care, regardless of which side they fought for. They showed us what peace actually looks like. I just made sure the right people saw what was already happening." 6 months after the treaty signing, James returned to Nexus Station. The medical wing was still busy, but the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of emergency triage and desperate attempts to save the dying, the medical staff now focused on rehabilitation and healing. Former soldiers from both sides recovered side by side, often forming friendships with the very people they had once fought against. James had requested permission to visit Kessa and Liz, and they met in one of the station's observation lounges. The view showed stars and distant nebulae, peaceful and unchanging. Liz saw James first and ran to him with a huge smile. "Commander James, you came back!" James knelt down to her level, returning her smile. "I promised I would, didn't I?" "And I wanted to thank you properly." "Thank me?" Liz looked confused. "But I didn't do anything." "You did more than you know," James said gently. "You told me your sister was tired. That one sentence changed everything." Kessa approached, looking healthier than she had 6 months ago. The dark circles under her eyes were gone. Her scales shone brightly. She actually smiled, something James had rarely seen during the war. "You look different," James observed as he stood to greet her. "I sleep now," Kessa said simply. 8 hours most nights. It's amazing what rest can do. She gestured to the lounge chairs. "Please, sit. Tell us how you've been." They talked for over an hour. Kessa described how the medical wing had transformed. "We're treating mostly recovery cases now, helping soldiers adjust to prosthetics, managing long-term injuries, providing mental health support. It's still hard work, but it's hopeful work. We're helping people rebuild their lives instead of just trying to save them from dying." "And the cooperation between Zenthari and Korvac's medical staff?" James asked. "Better than ever," Kessa said with pride. "We're actually developing new treatment protocols together, combining knowledge from both civilizations. Some of our joint research papers have been published in major medical journals. We're proving that cooperation produces better results than isolation." Liz, who had been playing with a holographic toy, suddenly looked up. "Commander James, you don't look tired anymore." James laughed. "Neither does your sister, neither do most people on this station these days." "Because everyone is friends now?" Liz asked with childlike directness. "Not everyone is friends yet," James admitted. "There's still disagreement and difficulty. Some people on both sides are angry about the treaty. They think their leaders gave up too much or compromised too easily. Change is hard, and not everyone accepts it right away." "But it's better than before, right?" Liz pressed. "Much better," James confirmed. "Because even when people disagree now, they're not dying over those disagreements. They're talking, arguing, debating, but they're alive to do it. And that makes all the difference." Kessa nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about what happened, about how the peace came together. It still seems almost impossible that one day in the medical wing could change so many minds." "It wasn't just one day," James said. "It was everything that came before it. You and your colleagues choosing to treat everyone equally. The wounded soldiers from both sides lying in beds next to each other. The accumulated exhaustion of everyone involved. That day in the medical wing just brought it all into focus." "And Liz's observation about everyone being tired," Kessa added, smiling at her sister. "Especially that," James agreed. As they continued talking, James noticed something through the observation window. A group of mixed Zenthari and Korvac's personnel walked by together, laughing at something. A few months ago, such a casual, friendly interaction would have been impossible. Before James left, Liz gave him a small gift she had made, a drawing showing stick figures of different species holding hands under a sky full of stars. "This is what peace looks like," she explained seriously. "Everyone holding hands so nobody falls down." James accepted the drawing with genuine emotion. "I'll treasure this always. Thank you, Liz." As he walked back through the station toward his departure shuttle, James reflected on everything that had happened. His diplomatic career would forever be defined by the accords of exhaustion. But he knew the real heroes were a tired medical officer who spoke truth to power and a little girl who saw what others missed. Sometimes the most profound changes came from the simplest observations. Sometimes peace wasn't achieved through brilliant strategy or political maneuvering, but through honest acknowledgement of shared suffering and shared humanity across all species. Sometimes you just needed someone innocent enough to ask why everyone didn't stop fighting and become friends instead. James boarded his shuttle with Liz's drawing carefully secured in his bag. As Nexus Station grew smaller in the viewport, he smiled. The galaxy was still complicated, still full of challenges and conflicts. But at least in this one corner of space, exhaustion had led to wisdom, and wisdom had led to peace. And it had all started because a little girl told a tired diplomat that he looked like her tired sister. Years later, when historians studied the war and its unexpected ending, they would analyze strategies and political factors. But those who had been there knew the truth. Peace had come not from strength or cleverness, but from the simple recognition that everyone, regardless of species, empire, or ideology, got tired of suffering eventually. The only question was whether they would recognize that exhaustion before it was too late. In this case, thanks to a child's innocent wisdom, they had.